The deafening crack of a pistol shot tore through the smoky haze of the Rattlesnake Saloon, silencing every voice in the establishment as Lillian Sinclair watched the last of her father's chips slide across the table, along with her future. Jefferson, Texas, 1875, a town perched on the edge of civilization and lawlessness, where fortunes changed hands nightly and lives were bargained away over cards. The Rattlesnake Saloon stood as a monument to the town's wilder elements, a place where cattle barons mingled with desperate men, all seeking their fortune beneath the yellowed glow of oil lamps. Lillian clutched the worn wooden post beside her, knuckles white against her pale skin. At 22, she had witnessed her father's descent from respectable merchant to gambling addict over the past 3 years. Tonight, though, was different. Tonight, Frank Sinclair had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "You ain't got nothin' left to bet, Sinclair," drawled Vernon Blackwell, the wealthiest and most ruthless man in Jefferson County. His rings glinted gold in the lamplight as he shuffled the cards with practiced ease. His reputation preceded him everywhere: land baron, businessman, and widower with a penchant for acquiring whatever caught his eye, regardless of whether it was for sale. Lillian's father, bleary-eyed and desperate, looked up. "I got something better than money." The saloon had fallen to a hush, the piano player's fingers hovering motionless above the keys as Frank Sinclair, once a respected merchant, pulled a folded document from his vest pocket. Lillian's breath caught as she recognized her father's scrawled signature at the bottom of what appeared to be a contract. "My daughter," Frank said, his voice cracking slightly. "Worth more than any land deed. She keeps house better than any servant and has education from back east." The horror of her father's words struck Lillian like a physical blow. She stepped from the shadows, her voice quavering but determined. "Father, you cannot be serious." Frank didn't meet her eyes. "Stay out of this, Lillian. It's already done." Vernon Blackwell's thin lips curled into a smile as his gaze traveled slowly over Lillian's form. At 45, the man had buried 2 wives already, and rumors about their untimely deaths circulated through town like wildfire. "I accept your wager, Sinclair," Blackwell said, tapping the table. "Though it's hardly sporting. Your girl against my $10,000. If you win, your debts are cleared and you walk away with money in your pocket." Lillian felt the room spin. How had it come to this? Her mother, God rest her soul, would have died all over again seeing what her husband had become. "Deal the cards," her father slurred, emptying his glass of whiskey. The dealer began to distribute the cards for what would be the final hand. Lillian watched in mute horror as her fate was decided by the turn of painted cardboard. Her father's face fell with each card revealed, while Blackwell's smile grew wider. "Looks like I'll be adding to my household," Blackwell announced, reaching for the document. "The Sinclair girl will make a fine. I'd like to join this game." The deep voice came from a dark corner of the saloon. A tall figure stepped into the lamplight. Dust from the trail still clung to his long coat, and his face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to danger, the worn handles of twin Colts visible beneath his open coat. "This is a private game," Blackwell said coldly. The stranger pulled up a chair regardless. "Not according to the house rules posted on the wall. Any game can be joined before the final hand is completed." He placed a heavy leather pouch on the table. "I believe there's still one more round of betting." The dealer looked to Blackwell, who nodded reluctantly. "What's your name, stranger?" Blackwell demanded. "Isaac Adler." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair and piercing eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into the shadow of a neatly trimmed beard. He couldn't have been more than 30. "You're that rancher from up north," Frank Sinclair said, recognition dawning. "The one they call the Peacemaker." Isaac Adler merely nodded, his attention fixed on the cards being dealt his way. Lillian had heard the stories. Isaac Adler had arrived in Texas after the war, buying land nobody thought worth having, only to discover water where others had found none. He'd built a respectable ranch and, more importantly, had earned a reputation for fair dealing and keeping trouble away from Jefferson with his skill with both words and weapons. "I don't recall inviting you into this business arrangement," Blackwell said, his voice dropping to a dangerous octave. Adler didn't look up from his cards. "You didn't, but I've been watching Mr. Sinclair lose money all night that he doesn't have. Now he's betting something that was never his to wager." His eyes flicked briefly to Lillian before returning to Blackwell. "I find I have an interest in preventing that particular transaction." Lillian felt a surge of hope mixed with shame. This stranger was speaking up while others in town, men who had known her since childhood, watched in silence. "The bet's been accepted," Blackwell insisted. "Then I'll buy in," Adler replied calmly. 20,000 against your 10 and Mr. Sinclair's inappropriate offering." The saloon erupted in hushed whispers. $20,000 was more money than most men in the room would see in a lifetime. Blackwell's face darkened, but greed won out over pride. "Your money's good. Let's see your cards." For the next few minutes, Lillian watched as the three men played out the final round. Her father folded quickly, shoulders slumping in defeat. The game came down to Adler and Blackwell, each man studying the other more than the cards in their hands. When the final card was turned, Blackwell's triumphant expression said it all before he laid down his hand. "Full house, kings over tens." A ripple of appreciation went through the crowd. It was a winning hand by any measure. Isaac Adler didn't flinch. He placed his cards on the table one by one, deliberately, each card landing with the weight of a coffin nail. 4 aces. The silence that followed was absolute. Blackwell's face contorted with rage as Adler calmly collected the pot and the contract that had Lillian's name on it. "This isn't over," Blackwell hissed, rising to his feet. "It is for tonight," Adler replied, folding the contract and tucking it into his vest pocket. His hand casually brushed his pistol, a subtle reminder of his reputation. Blackwell glared but made no move toward his own weapon. With a final venomous look at both Adler and the Sinclairs, he stormed from the saloon, his men trailing behind him. Lillian approached the table on unsteady legs as Adler turned to her father. "Mr. Sinclair," he said, his voice hard as iron, "a word of advice. A man who wagers what isn't his to lose deserves to lose everything else." Frank Sinclair slumped in his chair, the full weight of what he'd attempted finally seeming to register. I don't know what came over me." "I do," Adler replied. "Whiskey and weakness, neither is an excuse." He turned to Lillian, his expression softening slightly. "Miss Sinclair, I believe this belongs to you." He held out the contract. Lillian took it with trembling hands. "Mr. Adler, I cannot begin to thank." Before she could finish, Adler tore the contract in half, then tore it again. "There's nothing to thank me for. No man has the right to sell another human being, least of all his own daughter." He gathered his winnings, nodded once to Lillian, and strode toward the door. She watched him go, questions burning in her mind. Why had he intervened? What would he expect in return? "Miss Sinclair," he called over his shoulder, pausing at the doorway. "I suggest you find somewhere safe to stay tonight. Your father's judgment can't be trusted." With that, he disappeared into the night, leaving Lillian standing amid the torn pieces of the contract that had nearly sealed her fate. Frank Sinclair reached for another drink, but Lillian snatched the glass away. "That's enough, father," she said firmly. "We're going home." The ride back to their modest house on the edge of town was silent. Once a fine home befitting a successful merchant, the place had fallen into disrepair as Frank Sinclair sold off furniture and belongings to fund his gambling. Lillian helped her father to his bed, where he passed out almost immediately, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She sat by the kitchen window, watching the stars over Texas shimmer through tear-blurred eyes. The enormity of what had almost happened washed over her in waves. Her father had tried to sell her like property. Had it not been for Isaac Adler's unexpected intervention, she would now be in Blackwell's possession. The thought of Blackwell made her shudder. The man had buried 2 wives already, and rumors about their deaths weren't kind. Some whispered of beatings, others of neglect, but all agreed that Vernon Blackwell was not a man who valued women beyond what they could provide him. Dawn was breaking when Lillian finally made her decision. She could no longer stay in her father's house. His gambling would only lead to another night like this one, and Isaac Adler might not be there the next time. She packed her few belongings and the small amount of money she'd managed to hide away from her father's searching hands. It wasn't much, but it might buy her passage to Dallas or even further, somewhere her father's reputation wouldn't follow. As she finished packing, a knock came at the door. Cautiously, she approached, relief flooding her when she saw it was Martha Green, the widow who ran the boarding house in town. "Miss Sinclair," Martha said, her kind face etched with concern. "I heard about last night. Mr. Adler came by early this morning and paid for a room for you at my establishment, should you want it." Lillian blinked in surprise. "He did," Martha nodded. "Said it wasn't right for a young lady to be left in such circumstances. The room's yours for a month, no strings attached." "I don't understand why he would do this," Lillian murmured. "Mr. Adler keeps to himself mostly, but he's a good man," Martha replied. "Not everyone who fought in the war came back hardened. Some came back determined to find a better way." Lillian hesitated, glancing back at the house that had been her home for all her life, now little more than a shell haunted by memories of better times. "I'll come," she decided. "Just let me leave a note for my father." On a piece of paper, she wrote simply, "I forgive you, but I cannot stay. Do not look for me." It was more mercy than he deserved, but she couldn't bring herself to leave without a word. As Lillian followed Martha to the boarding house, carrying her single bag of possessions, she caught sight of Isaac Adler mounting his horse outside the general store. Their eyes met briefly across the dusty street. He tipped his hat to her in a gesture of quiet acknowledgement before riding out of town, back toward his ranch to the north. Lillian wondered if she would ever see him again, and why the thought of never seeing the mysterious stranger left her feeling oddly bereft. The Widow Green's boarding house stood as an oasis of respectability in Jefferson. Clean, well-maintained, and populated exclusively by women of good character, it provided Lillian with something she hadn't realized she desperately needed: safety. Her room, though small, was clean and private, with a window overlooking the main street. For the first few days, she barely left it, except for meals in the communal dining room. The humiliation of her father's actions hung over her like a shadow, and though no one in the boarding house mentioned the incident, Lillian felt certain everyone in Jefferson was talking about it. On the 4th day, Martha Green knocked on her door with an unexpected proposition. "The general store needs a bookkeeper," she said. "Mr. Collins asked if I knew anyone with figures. I thought of you right away." Lillian hesitated. "People might not want to do business with the daughter of Frank Sinclair." Martha's kind face hardened slightly. "The sins of the father aren't yours to bear, child. Besides, this town has shorter memories than you might think, especially when it comes to useful skills." The next morning found Lillian behind the counter at Collins' general store, ledger open before her. The work was engaging enough to keep her mind occupied, and Mr. Collins was fair, if not particularly warm. Most importantly, the position paid enough that she could begin saving for her future. A week passed, then 2. Lillian established a routine that, while not exciting, gave her purpose. She worked at the store during the day, took her meals at the boarding house, and spent evenings reading or helping Martha with small tasks. If she sometimes found herself looking north, toward the distant hills where Isaac Adler's ranch lay, she tried not to dwell on it. Her father had attempted to visit her once, sober and shamefaced, but Lillian had refused to see him. The wound was still too raw, the betrayal too profound. Martha had delivered her message. When she was ready, she would seek him out, not before. As for Vernon Blackwell, he seemed to have retreated to his estate outside town, though Lillian often felt watched when walking between the store and the boarding house. Whether it was paranoia or reality, she couldn't be sure, but she took to carrying a small Derringer pistol that Martha had pressed into her hand, just in case. It was nearly a month after that fateful night at the saloon when Isaac Adler returned to Jefferson. Lillian was inventorying new stock when the bell above the door jingled, announcing his arrival. She looked up, momentarily startled by his presence. He seemed equally surprised to find her there. "Miss Sinclair," he said, removing his hat. "I didn't expect to see you working here." "Mr. Adler," she replied, straightening her apron. "Mrs. Green mentioned your kindness in securing me a room. I've been meaning to thank you properly." He shook his head. "No thanks necessary." An awkward silence fell between them. Up close, in the clear light of day, Lillian could better appreciate the man who had intervened in her fate. His face was weathered from the sun, but handsome in a rugged way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than his serious demeanor might indicate. The scar along his jaw looked like it had come from a knife rather than a bullet. "What can I help you with today?" she finally asked, falling back on professional courtesy. "I need supplies," he said, handing over a list. "Ranch is expanding and we're short on essentials." As Lillian gathered the items, she found herself curious about this man who had wagered a fortune to save a stranger. "If you don't mind my asking, Mr. Adler, why did you do it?" He didn't pretend to misunderstand her question. "I've seen what happens when people are treated as property, Miss Sinclair. Spent 4 years fighting a war over it. Didn't much care to see it happen in Jefferson." "You fought for the Union then?" He nodded. "Enlisted at 18, saw things no man should see. When it was over, I came west looking for something different." "And did you find it?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Getting closer every day." Mr. Collins emerged from the back room, interrupting their conversation. "Adler, good to see you in town. How's that new stallion working out for you?" As the men discussed horses, Lillian finished gathering Isaac's supplies. When she presented him with the total, he paid without haggling, unusual for most of the store's customers. "Will you be staying in town long?" She found herself asking as she wrapped his purchases. "Just overnight. Have business with the bank in the morning, then heading back to the ranch." "I see." She wasn't sure why she felt disappointed. "Well, safe travels, Mr. Adler." He hesitated, then said, "I usually take dinner at the hotel restaurant when I'm in town. It's not fancy, but the food's honest. If you'd care to join me, I'd welcome the company." The invitation surprised her. "I wouldn't want to impose. It's just a meal, Miss Sinclair. Consider it a chance for me to hear how you're faring, nothing more." Lillian considered for a moment. Dining alone with a man would normally be improper, but the hotel restaurant was public enough to prevent gossip, and she did owe him her gratitude. 7 o'clock, she suggested. He nodded, placed his hat back on his head, and left with his supplies, the bell jingling in his wake. Mr. Collins raised an eyebrow. "That man rarely speaks more than 10 words at a time. You made quite an impression." Lillian felt her cheeks warm. "He was kind to me when I needed kindness." "I owe him a debt." "Adler's not the type to collect on debts like that," Collins replied. "If he invited you to dinner, it's because he wants your company, pure and simple." That evening, Lillian dressed with more care than usual in her best blue dress, one of the few nice things she'd brought from her father's house. It was slightly outdated but well made, emphasizing her slender waist and bringing out the blue of her eyes. Martha helped her pin up her auburn hair, studying her reflection in the mirror. "You look lovely, dear, but be careful with your heart. Men like Adler don't settle easily." "It's just dinner," Lillian protested, "to thank him properly." Martha's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe that for a moment, but she said nothing more as Lillian departed for the hotel. The Jefferson Hotel restaurant was modest by city standards, but considered fine dining in their small town. White tablecloths and actual glass goblets set it apart from the saloons and cafes that served most of the population. When Lillian arrived, she found Isaac already seated at a corner table, freshly shaven and dressed in a clean shirt with a string tie. He stood as she approached, pulling out her chair. "You look very nice, Miss Sinclair," he said, the compliment straightforward and without embellishment. "Thank you, Mr. Adler, and please call me Lillian." "Isaac, then," he replied with a nod. Their conversation started hesitantly, both aware of the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. The waiter brought beef stew and fresh bread, simple fare but well prepared, and as they ate, the initial awkwardness began to fade. Lillian found herself telling him about her childhood in Jefferson, her mother's death from fever 5 years earlier, and how her father had changed afterward, gambling away their security bit by bit. Isaac listened attentively, asking occasional questions but mostly allowing her to speak without interruption. "I keep asking myself if I should have seen it coming," she admitted. "The gambling was bad enough, but to wager a human being, his own daughter." Isaac's expression darkened. "Some men lose their way so completely they forget what matters. It wasn't your fault." "What about you?" she asked, wanting to shift the conversation. "You mentioned coming west after the war," he nodded, taking a sip of coffee. "I was a scout in the Union Army. Had a knack for finding safe passages and reading terrain. After Appomattox, I couldn't go back to Pennsylvania. Too many ghosts. Came to Texas because everyone said a Yankee couldn't make it here." A hint of a smile played at his lips. "I've always been contrary." "And you built your ranch from nothing. Land was cheap if you knew where to look. Found water where others hadn't bothered searching. The rest was just hard work and some luck." He paused, studying her. "What will you do now? Stay in Jefferson?" Lillian traced the rim of her water glass with her finger. "I'm not sure. The position at the store is good and Mrs. Green has been kind, but Jefferson holds painful memories," he finished for her. "Yes," she admitted, "and I fear my father will only get worse. Vernon Blackwell, too, concerns me. He doesn't strike me as a man who accepts defeat graciously." Isaac's face hardened at the mention of Blackwell. "You're right to be cautious. Blackwell's not one to forget a perceived slight." Their conversation drifted to lighter topics as dessert arrived, apple pie still warm from the oven. Lillian found herself laughing at Isaac's dry observations about town life and his ranch hand's antics. Behind his reserved exterior was a sharp wit and an observant mind. As the evening drew to a close, Isaac walked her back to the boarding house. The night air was cool, stars brilliantly clear above them in the Texas sky. They walked in comfortable silence, their shoulders occasionally brushing. At the boarding house steps, Lillian turned to him. "Thank you for dinner and for everything else," he nodded, his expression serious in the lamplight. "I ride back tomorrow after my business is concluded. Would it be forward to write to you?" The request surprised and pleased her. "I'd like that." For a moment it seemed he might say more, but instead he simply took her hand and pressed it briefly. "Good night, Lillian. Good night, Isaac." She watched him walk back toward the hotel, his tall figure silhouetted against the night before going inside. Martha was still up, pretending to mend by the fire but clearly waiting to hear about the evening. "Just dinner," Lillian said before Martha could ask, but she couldn't keep the smile from her face as she climbed the stairs to her room. True to his word, Isaac began writing to Lillian after returning to his ranch. His letters arrived every 2 weeks, carried by whatever ranch hand happened to be coming to town for supplies. They were never lengthy. Isaac expressed himself concisely on paper as in person, but they offered glimpses into his life that intrigued her. He wrote about the day-to-day operations of the ranch, the challenges of raising cattle in the often harsh Texas climate, and occasional humorous anecdotes about his men. Reading between the lines, Lillian sensed a man who cared deeply about his land and the people who worked it, who found purpose in building something lasting. In return, she wrote about her work at the store, the comings and goings of Jefferson, and her growing friendship with Martha Green. She found herself being more honest in her letters than she often was in person, confessing her fears about the future and her lingering hurt over her father's betrayal. Frank Sinclair had left town shortly after the incident at the saloon, reportedly heading to Shreveport to seek work. Lillian had mixed feelings about his departure, relief that she wouldn't have to face him daily, but sadness that their relationship had disintegrated so completely. As for Vernon Blackwell, he remained a dark cloud on the horizon. Though he rarely came into town himself, his men were frequent visitors to Jefferson, and Lillian often felt their eyes on her as she went about her business. Nothing had happened to justify her unease, but instinct told her Blackwell hadn't forgotten what had transpired that night. Spring turned to summer, and with it came sweltering heat that left Jefferson's streets nearly empty during the midday hours. Lillian had been working at the general store for almost 3 months when Isaac's letter arrived with an unexpected invitation. Would she consider visiting his ranch the following Sunday? He would send a wagon to collect her and return her the same day. Martha advised caution. "It's not entirely proper for you to visit a bachelor's home, even for a day." "His foreman's wife will be present," Lillian countered, having already considered the propriety issue. "And it's a chance to see something beyond Jefferson's borders." In truth, her motivation ran deeper than mere curiosity. Her correspondence with Isaac had awakened feelings she hadn't experienced before, a warm anticipation whenever his letters arrived, a sense of connection with someone who seemed to understand her without judgment. She wanted to see him again, to discover if those feelings persisted in person or were merely the product of lonely imagination. Sunday dawned clear and hot. Lillian dressed carefully in a light cotton dress appropriate for the heat, but still presentable. At precisely 9 o'clock, a wagon pulled up outside the boarding house, driven by an older man who introduced himself as Caleb, Isaac's foreman. "The boss is looking forward to your visit, Miss Sinclair," he said as he helped her into the wagon. "Been having us spruce up the place all week." The journey took nearly 2 hours, following the river north before turning onto a less traveled road that wound through hills covered with oak and cedar. As they crested a final rise, Adler Ranch spread out below them, a collection of well-maintained buildings nestled in a protected valley, with corrals, a small orchard, and fields of hay stretching toward the horizon. A creek wound through the property, explaining how the ranch thrived where others had failed to find water. Isaac was waiting at the main house, a modest but solid structure built from local limestone. He helped Lillian down from the wagon, his hand warm around hers. "Welcome to Adler Ranch," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. "I hope the journey wasn't too taxing." "Not at all," she assured him. "Your land is beautiful." He introduced her to Sarah, Caleb's wife, a cheerful woman in her 50s who served as the ranch's cook and housekeeper. After refreshments on the shaded porch, Isaac offered to show Lillian around the property. They walked side by side, Isaac pointing out the various aspects of ranch operations. He spoke with quiet passion about his plans for the future, expanding the herd, improving the bloodlines of his horses, perhaps planting more orchards once the water system was further developed. "You've accomplished so much in just a few years," Lillian remarked, genuinely impressed. "I had a vision of what this place could be," he replied. "Some called it stubbornness. I prefer to think of it as determination." They paused at the top of a small rise overlooking the valley. In the distance, a small herd of horses grazed peacefully. "Why did you invite me here today, Isaac?" Lillian asked directly. He was silent for a moment, squinting at the horizon. "Because letters can only say so much. Because I wanted you to see what I'm building here. And because I find myself thinking about you more often than is probably sensible." The honesty of his answer caught her off guard. "I think about you too," she admitted, her cheeks warming. He turned to face her fully. "I'm not a man of fancy words, Lillian. I say what I mean and mean what I say. I'd like to continue seeing you properly if you're amenable." "You're courting me then?" she asked, wanting clarity. "I'd like to, yes. Though I should warn you, I live simply out here. It's not an easy life, especially for a woman raised in town." Lillian looked out over the ranch, considering his words. "I wasn't raised for idleness, Isaac." And after recent events, I've learned that security isn't found in fine things but in honest relationships. Something in his expression softened. Then may I call on you properly when I'm in town, and perhaps you might visit again with Martha as chaperone if that would be more appropriate. I'd like that very much, she replied. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Lillian felt something shift between them, a recognition of possibilities that hadn't existed before. The moment was broken by Sarah calling them for the midday meal, but the connection remained, a gentle undercurrent throughout the remainder of her visit. As promised, Caleb drove her back to Jefferson before sunset. At the boarding house, Isaac helped her down from the wagon and walked her to the door. "Thank you for coming today," he said. "I'll be in town on Friday for the cattle auction. May I call on you then?" "I'd be disappointed if you didn't," she replied with a smile. He hesitated, then took her hand and pressed it briefly to his lips. "Until Friday, then." Lillian watched the wagon depart, her hands still tingling from the brief contact. Inside, Martha was waiting with barely contained curiosity. "Well," she prompted as Lillian removed her bonnet. "He's asked to court me," Lillian said simply. Martha's face broke into a broad smile. "It's about time. I was beginning to think that man would never get around to it." Her expression grew more serious. "He's a good man, Lillian, one of the few." "I know," Lillian replied softly. "That's what frightens me a little. After everything with my father, I'm afraid to trust too easily." Martha patted her hand. "Trust isn't given all at once, dear. It's built day by day, choice by choice. The question is whether he's worth the risk." As Lillian prepared for bed that night, she pondered Martha's words. Was Isaac Adler worth the risk of opening her heart again? The memory of his steady gaze, his straightforward manner, and the peace she'd felt on his land suggested that perhaps he was. The following weeks established a pattern. Isaac came to town every Friday, ostensibly for business but increasingly to spend time with Lillian. They took walks along the river, shared meals at the hotel restaurant, and sometimes simply sat on the boarding house porch, talking as twilight descended. Each visit deepened Lillian's understanding of the quiet, thoughtful man who had stepped into her life so unexpectedly. She learned that beneath his reserved exterior was a man of deep convictions and unexpected gentleness. He spoke rarely of the war, but when he did, it was with a complexity of feeling that revealed how profoundly those years had shaped him. He had seen humanity at its worst, and still chosen to believe in its potential for good. A faith Lillian found herself sharing more with each passing day. July brought stifling heat and the annual Jefferson Summer Festival, a tradition dating back before the war. Despite the temperature, the town square filled with booths selling handicrafts and food. A small band played cheerful tunes, and couples danced on a wooden platform erected for the occasion. Isaac arrived early that Saturday, having spent the night at the hotel rather than making the long ride back to his ranch. He found Lillian helping at Martha's pie stand, her cheeks flushed from the heat and exertion. "You look like you could use a break," he observed, offering her a cup of lemonade he'd purchased from a neighboring booth. "Thank you," she said gratefully, taking a long sip. "It's busier than expected this year." Martha shooed them away. "Go enjoy the festival. I've got Sarah Jenkins coming to help me soon." Isaac offered Lillian his arm. "Shall we?" They strolled through the festival, stopping occasionally to greet acquaintances or admire crafts. Isaac purchased a small hand-carved wooden horse from an elderly carpenter, presenting it to Lillian with a shy smile. "It reminded me of you," he explained. "Strong but graceful." The unexpected compliment warmed her more than the summer sun. Their courtship had been marked by such moments, small gestures that revealed the depth of feeling beneath Isaac's composed exterior. As evening approached and lanterns were lit around the square, the band struck up a waltz. Couples moved toward the dance platform, and Isaac turned to Lillian with an inquiring look. "Would you care to dance?" She hesitated. "I'm afraid I'm not very accomplished. We didn't have many occasions for dancing after Mother died." "That makes two of us," he admitted. "But I'm willing to risk some bruised toes if you are." Laughing, she placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her to the platform. His hand at her waist was steady, his steps more confident than he'd claimed. As they moved among the other dancers, Lillian felt a sense of rightness that transcended the simple pleasure of the moment. "I've been meaning to ask," Isaac said as they circled the platform. "Have you heard anything from your father?" The question caught her by surprise. "A letter arrived last week. He's found work as a clerk in Shreveport, claims to have given up gambling. He asked for forgiveness." She sighed. "I wrote back but made no promises. Why do you ask?" "Just concerned," he replied. "I've heard rumors that Blackwell's been asking about him." A chill ran through Lillian despite the warm evening. "What kind of rumors?" "Nothing specific, just that he's been making inquiries." Isaac's expression grew serious. "Blackwell isn't one to forget a perceived slight, Lillian, and he lost a significant amount of money that night." "Do you think he means my father harm?" "I don't know, but I'd rest easier if you'd be especially careful until we know more." The warning cast a shadow over the evening, though Isaac did his best to restore the festive mood. As the music continued and night fully descended, they found themselves at the edge of the square, partially hidden by the drooping branches of an old oak tree, in the gentle glow of distant lanterns. Isaac turned to face her. "Lillian," he began, then paused, seeming to search for words unusual for a man who typically spoke with such directness. "What is it?" she prompted softly. "These past months, getting to know you, they've meant more to me than I can properly express." He took her hands in his. "I came to Texas looking for a fresh start, someplace to build something meaningful after years of destruction. I found the land, built the ranch, but something was still missing." Lillian's heart quickened. "And now I find myself thinking about a future that includes more than just cattle and horses." His eyes held her steadily. "A future with you in it, if you'd consider such a thing." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted across the square, raised voices, then the distinctive sound of breaking glass. Isaac instinctively moved in front of Lillian as several men burst into view, clearly intoxicated and looking for trouble. With a sinking feeling, Lillian recognized two of them as Blackwell's hired men. The largest of the group, a brutish man called Jefferson, was shouting something about Yankee lovers and women who don't know their place. "Stay here," Isaac murmured, but Lillian caught his arm. "Don't engage them." "It's what they want." He hesitated, clearly torn between protecting her and avoiding a confrontation that could only end badly. Before he could decide, Sheriff Taylor appeared, rifle in hand. "That's enough, Jefferson," he called. "You boys take your business elsewhere or spend the night in my jail." For a tense moment, it seemed Jefferson might challenge the sheriff, but one of his companions pulled him back. As they retreated, Jefferson's gaze fell on Lillian and Isaac in the shadows. He spat on the ground and called out, "Blackwell sends his regards, Miss Sinclair. Says to tell you he always collects what's owed him one way or another." The sheriff stepped between them, gesturing with his rifle. "Move along now." As the men disappeared down the street toward the saloons, Sheriff Taylor approached Lillian and Isaac. "You two all right?" Isaac nodded, his jaw tight. "Fine, Sheriff, appreciate the intervention." "Been expecting trouble from Blackwell's boys," Taylor admitted. "Man's been in a foul mood since that poker game." He tipped his hat to Lillian. "Miss Sinclair, might be best if you weren't alone for a while." "Blackwell's not one to make idle threats." After the sheriff departed, Isaac turned to Lillian, his expression grave. "I should get you back to the boarding house." The walk back was silent, both lost in thought about the implications of Jefferson's words. At the boarding house steps, Isaac took both her hands in his. "Lillian, I meant what I was saying before we were interrupted, but now I'm concerned that my attention is bringing Blackwell's wrath down on you." "Don't," she said firmly. "Blackwell's anger existed before you entered my life. If anything, your presence has protected me." He studied her face in the moonlight. "Then let me continue to protect you. Come to the ranch. Martha could accompany you as propriety demands." "You're asking me to leave Jefferson, my job, my life here?" "Temporarily," he clarified. Until we can be certain Blackwell isn't a threat, the ranch is defensible and my men are loyal. Lillian considered his offer. The thought of leaving town was daunting, but Jensen's threat had been clear. And beneath the practical concerns, she couldn't deny the appeal of spending more time with Isaac, of seeing more of the life he'd built. I'll speak with Martha and Mr. Collins tomorrow, she decided. If they agree, then yes, I'll come. Relief washed over his features. He raised her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Thank you. As she watched him walk back toward the hotel, Lillian wondered if the danger from Blackwell was truly as severe as Isaac feared, or if it had simply provided an opportunity for them to take the next step in their relationship. Either way, she found herself looking forward to the days ahead with a mixture of trepidation and anticipation. Martha, predictably, insisted on accompanying Lillian to the ranch, packing her bags almost before Lillian had finished explaining the situation. Mr. Collins was more reluctant to lose his bookkeeper, but agreed that safety must take precedence. Just don't let Adler convince you to stay out there permanently, he grumbled. Good bookkeepers are hard to find. 3 days later, Isaac arrived with a wagon to transport them to the ranch. The journey was slower with Martha's considerable luggage, but they arrived by mid-afternoon. Sarah greeted them warmly, showing them to the 2 guest rooms that had been prepared. Isaac's had the men working like demons to get everything ready, she confided to Lillian. Never seen him so particular about the state of the house. Life at Adler Ranch fell into a pleasant rhythm. Lillian found herself rising with the sun, helping Sarah with breakfast for the ranch hands, then exploring the property or assisting with whatever tasks needed doing. Isaac was often busy with ranch operations during the day, but evenings were spent together on the porch, talking as the stars emerged overhead. Martha, initially concerned about propriety, relaxed as she observed their interactions. Isaac was unfailingly respectful, never overstepping the boundaries of proper courtship despite the unusual living arrangement. More importantly, she saw how he looked at Lillian when he thought no one was watching with a tenderness that spoke volumes about his feelings. A week passed, then 2. No word came from town about Blackwell or his men, but Isaac maintained vigilance, sending ranch hands to Jefferson regularly for supplies and information. The isolation of the ranch, initially strange to Lillian after town life, became increasingly comfortable as she adapted to its rhythms. She discovered unexpected joy in simple tasks, helping in the kitchen garden, learning to ride properly on a gentle mare Isaac provided, even assisting Sarah with preserving summer fruits for the coming winter. There was a satisfaction in tangible work that her bookkeeping had never provided, a sense of building something lasting. More significantly, her relationship with Isaac deepened through daily proximity. She witnessed his interactions with his men fair but firm, earning loyalty through respect rather than fear. She saw his patience with animals, his reverence for the land, his quiet determination when facing setbacks. Each observation confirmed what she'd begun to suspect in Jefferson. Isaac Adler was a man of exceptional character, the kind worth building a life alongside. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Isaac broached a subject they'd been circling for weeks. "Lillian," he began, his voice more hesitant than usual, "I know these aren't ideal circumstances with you here out of necessity rather than choice, but I find myself grateful for the time it's given us." She smiled, understanding what he wasn't quite saying. "I'm grateful too. I've come to love this place more than I expected." "Just the place?" he asked, a rare teasing note in his voice. Lillian felt her cheeks warm. "No, not just the place." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Before we were interrupted at the festival, I was trying to tell you something important. I'm not a man who believes in leaving things unsaid, especially when they matter." He shifted to face her fully. "I love you, Lillian." I think I began falling in love with you that night at the saloon, when you stood up to your father with such quiet dignity. Everything I've learned about you since has only deepened those feelings." The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Lillian felt a surge of emotion so powerful it momentarily robbed her of speech. "Isaac," she finally managed, "I love you too. I think I've known it for some time but was afraid to admit it, even to myself." The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the hills. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I don't want to rush you," he said, "especially with everything that's happened. But when you're ready, I'd like to make this official, to ask you properly to be my wife." The future opened before Lillian like a vista from one of the ranch's highest points, vast, beautiful, and full of promise. "I don't need more time," she said softly. "I already know my answer would be yes." For a moment it seemed he might kiss her. Instead, he stood, still holding her hand. "Then wait here. There's something I want to get." He disappeared into the house, returning moments later with a small wooden box. Kneeling before her on the porch, he opened it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond that caught the last rays of the setting sun. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I sent for it weeks ago, hoping for this moment." His eyes, earnest and full of love, held hers. "Lillian Sinclair, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she whispered, her vision blurring with tears of joy. "Yes, Isaac, I will." He slid the ring onto her finger, then rose to sit beside her again. This time, he did kiss her gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded. It was her first real kiss, and Lillian found herself breathless when they finally parted. "I should probably ask Martha for her blessing," Isaac said, his voice husky. "As your de facto guardian," Lillian laughed softly. "I'm fairly certain she's been expecting this since we arrived, but yes, we should tell her." They found Martha in the sitting room, pretending to read but clearly waiting for them to come inside. One look at their faces told her everything she needed to know. "Well, it's about time," she declared, putting aside her book. "I was beginning to think I'd grow old waiting for you two to come to your senses." Isaac formally asked for her blessing, which Martha granted with tears in her eyes. "Your mother would be so happy for you, Lillian," she said, embracing her. "And so would your father, if he were still the man he once was." The mention of her father brought a momentary shadow to Lillian's joy. Despite everything, she wished he could share in this happiness, could see that she had found someone worthy of her trust. As if reading her thoughts, Isaac squeezed her hand. "If you want to write to him, tell him the news, I'd support that." His understanding touched her deeply. "Perhaps I will, thank you." That night, as Lillian prepared for bed, she found herself studying the ring on her finger in the lamplight. From disaster had come unexpected joy, a future she couldn't have imagined the night her father tried to wager her away like property. She fell asleep planning a letter to her father, hoping that perhaps news of her engagement might be the catalyst he needed to truly change his ways. The thought of reconciliation, however tentative, added another layer to her happiness. The next morning, Caleb returned from his weekly trip to Jefferson with disturbing news. Frank Sinclair had been seen in town, apparently back from Shreveport, and asking questions about his daughter's whereabouts. "He didn't look good, miss," Caleb reported, desperate-like, "and he wasn't alone." "Who was with him?" Isaac asked sharply, one of Blackwell's men, Jensen. Lillian felt her blood run cold. "That doesn't make sense. Why would my father be with one of Blackwell's men?" "It gets worse," Caleb continued reluctantly. "Sheriff Taylor said your father's claiming you're being held against your will out here, that Adler coerced you away from town." Isaac's expression darkened. "That's absurd." "What does Blackwell gain from this?" Lillian wondered aloud. "Revenge," Isaac said grimly. "If he can discredit me, turn the town against me with rumors, it weakens my position, and if your father's desperate enough, indebted enough." "He'd say whatever Blackwell wanted," Lillian finished, the realization bitter on her tongue. Despite her father's letter claiming reform, it seemed he'd fallen back into old patterns. Isaac paced the kitchen, thinking. Taylor knows the truth, but he can only do so much if people choose to believe rumors. I should go to town, confront this directly. Not alone, Lillian insisted. I'm coming with you. If my father's spreading lies about my being held here against my will, my presence will disprove it immediately. Martha, who had been listening silently, spoke up. She's right, Isaac. Lillian needs to be seen, needs to speak for herself. He nodded reluctantly. We'll leave first thing tomorrow. Caleb, I want 4 men riding with us, armed. You think there'll be trouble? Martha asked, concerned. I think Blackwell's been planning something since that poker game, Isaac replied. And I'd rather be prepared than caught off guard. That night, as they prepared for the journey to town, Isaac pulled Lillian aside. If things go badly tomorrow, he said quietly, I want you to know that my only concern is your safety. Whatever happens, whatever choices need to be made, that comes first. She placed her hand against his cheek. We'll face it together, Isaac. I won't let Blackwell or my father destroy what we've found. He turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. Get some rest. Tomorrow may be a long day. The ride to Jefferson the following morning was tense. Isaac insisted Lillian travel in the wagon with Martha rather than on horseback, with 2 armed ranch hands riding ahead and 2 behind. Isaac himself rode alongside the wagon, his rifle across his saddle and his expression grim. They reached town just before noon, the streets unusually busy for a weekday. As they approached the main street, Lillian noticed people stopping to stare, whispers spreading like ripples in a pond. They've been talking, Martha murmured. Rumors have been circulating. Isaac helped Lillian down from the wagon. Let's go directly to the sheriff's office. Taylor will know what's being said. Before they could move, a familiar voice called out. Lillian, Frank Sinclair pushed through the gathering crowd, his appearance shocking Lillian. In just a few months, her father had aged years. His clothes hung loose on his frame, his face was gaunt, and his eyes held a desperate, haunted look. Father, she acknowledged coolly, I understand you've been spreading some interesting stories about Mr. Adler. Frank glanced nervously over his shoulder before stepping closer. You don't understand, girl. You need to come with me now. It's not safe. The only danger to Miss Sinclair has been from you and Blackwell, Isaac interrupted, moving to stand beside Lillian. At the mention of Blackwell, Frank flinched visibly. You don't know what he's capable of, he hissed. What he's planning. Before Lillian could respond, Sheriff Taylor pushed through the crowd. Adler, Miss Sinclair, glad to see you. There's been some concerning talk lately. So we've heard, Isaac replied. We came to set the record straight, the sheriff nodded. Best do it officially then. Come to my office. You too, Sinclair. As they moved to follow the sheriff, Lillian noticed several of Blackwell's men positioned around the edges of the crowd. Jensen, the brute who had threatened her at the festival, caught her eye and smirked. Inside the sheriff's office, Taylor closed the door and removed his hat. Sinclair here showed up 3 days ago claiming his daughter was being held captive at your ranch, Adler. Said you forced her there to avoid paying gambling debts. That's ridiculous, Lillian exclaimed. I went willingly after Blackwell's men threatened me at the summer festival. Martha Green accompanied us as chaperone. That's what I figured, Taylor said, but I had to investigate the claims. Particularly when Blackwell started backing Sinclair's story. Frank Sinclair slumped in a chair, avoiding his daughter's accusing gaze. You don't understand what's happening, he muttered. Then explain it, Isaac suggested coldly. Frank looked up, his eyes darting nervously to the window. Blackwell owns me, he said simply. Lost big in Shreveport. He was there, bought up my markers, said he'd forgive the debt if I helped him get back at you too. By lying about me being held against my will, Lillian asked incredulously. It was just supposed to cause trouble, get the town talking. Frank ran a trembling hand over his face. But then he started saying other things, about making examples of people who cross him. Sheriff Taylor leaned forward. Are you saying Blackwell is planning violence, Sinclair? Frank nodded miserably. He's got men positioned around town. When Adler came in to clear his name, they were going to provoke a confrontation, make it look like self-defense when they killed him. Lillian gasped, instinctively reaching for Isaac's hand. He took it, squeezing reassuringly, but his expression had hardened to granite. "And what about your daughter?" he asked quietly. "What was to happen to her in this plan?" Frank couldn't meet his eyes. "Blackwell said she'd be taken care of." The implications hung in the air like smoke. Lillian felt sick at the thought of how close they'd come to walking into such a trap. "Sheriff," Isaac said, his voice controlled but tight with anger, "I suggest you arrest Blackwell for conspiracy to commit murder." Taylor shook his head. "On the word of a known gambler and liar." "No judge would accept that as evidence." He stood, checking his pistol. "But I can increase patrols and warn my deputies. Blackwell's men won't try anything with the law watching." "That's not enough," Isaac argued. "Blackwell won't stop until he gets what he wants." "And what exactly does he want?" Lillian asked her father. Frank looked up, his expression haunted. "Revenge on Adler for humiliating him publicly. And you, Lillian, he still considers you part of the wager he lost." Disgust and fear churned in Lillian's stomach. "I was never anyone's to wager or win." "You know that, and I know that," Taylor said gently, "but men like Blackwell see the world differently. To him, it's about pride and possession." Isaac stood, his decision made. "We're leaving Jefferson today. Lillian and I are engaged to be married, and we'll start our life together somewhere Blackwell can't reach us." Frank looked up sharply. "Engaged?" Lillian held up her hand, showing the ring. "Yes, father, Isaac has asked me to be his wife, and I've accepted." Something like shame crossed Frank's face. "I never meant for any of this to happen, Lillian. You have to believe that." "What you meant doesn't matter," she replied, years of hurt and disappointment hardening her voice. "What you did is what counts. And now you're working for the man who tried to buy me like property." "I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice," Isaac interrupted. "You just made the wrong one. Again." The sheriff cleared his throat. "If you're leaving town, best do it carefully. I'll have 2 deputies escort you to the town limits." He turned to Frank. "As for you, Sinclair, you've admitted to conspiring in a potential murder plot. I'm holding you until I sort this out." Frank didn't resist as Taylor guided him toward the cells at the back of the office. At the door, he paused, looking back at his daughter. "I'm sorry, Lillian," he said, his voice breaking. "For everything, I hope someday you can forgive me." She couldn't bring herself to respond, the wound too fresh and deep. Instead, she turned to Isaac. "Let's go home." They left the sheriff's office cautiously, Taylor's deputies flanking them as they made their way back to where Martha waited with the wagon and horses. The streets seemed unnaturally quiet, townspeople watching from doorways and windows. As they reached the wagon, Jensen stepped into the street, 3 of Blackwell's men beside him. "Leaving so soon, Adler," he called. "We was hoping you'd stay for a proper welcome." The deputies moved forward, hands on their weapons. "Back off, Jensen, sheriff's orders." For a tense moment, it seemed conflict was inevitable. Then, from the end of the street, Vernon Blackwell himself appeared on horseback, immaculately dressed as always, his cold gaze fixed on Isaac and Lillian. "Another time, perhaps," he called to his men, his voice carrying clearly. "Mr. Adler and Miss Sinclair are eager to return to their arrangement." His smile never reached his eyes. "Do give my regards to Frank Sinclair when you see him next, such a loyal employee." With that parting barb, he wheeled his horse and rode away, his men falling in behind him after casting dark looks at Isaac. "Let's move," one of the deputies urged. "That man's like a rattlesnake, might give warning, but still deadly." The journey back to the ranch was made at a punishing pace, no one speaking much beyond what was necessary. Lillian sat in the wagon beside Martha, her mind racing with the implications of what they'd learned. Blackwell wouldn't simply give up. His appearance in town had been a message he could reach them whenever he chose. By the time they reached the ranch, night had fallen. Isaac called his men together, explaining the situation and doubling the guard around the property. Inside, he, Lillian, Martha, and Caleb gathered around the kitchen table to discuss their options. We could head to Dallas, Caleb suggested, or even further north. Isaac shook his head. I've spent 5 years building this ranch from nothing. I won't be driven off my land by threats. But we can't live under siege forever, Lillian pointed out, and I won't have people risking their lives because of my father's mistakes. It's not just about your father anymore, Isaac replied. Blackwell's pride was wounded when I won that hand. He won't forget that. Martha, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Why not bring the fight to him? On your terms, not his. They all turned to look at her in surprise. What do you mean? Isaac asked. Blackwell's power comes from fear and money, Martha explained. Take away either and he's just a man. You said yourself that the night of the poker game, other men in town saw what he tried to do wager for a human being and did nothing. They're afraid of him. So, Caleb prompted. So show them they don't need to be, Martha said simply. Blackwell's not the only wealthy man in the county. He's not the only one with connections, but he's made himself seem untouchable. Isaac considered her words. You're suggesting we challenge him publicly, force a confrontation where his usual tactics won't work. Martha nodded. Exactly, on ground of your choosing, not his. The discussion continued late into the night, plans proposed and discarded, strategies examined from every angle. By dawn, they had settled on a course of action risky, but with the potential to end Blackwell's threat permanently. Are you sure about this? Isaac asked Lillian as they stood alone on the porch, watching the sun rise over the hills. Once we start down this path, there's no turning back. She took his hand, the simple gold ring on her finger catching the early light. I'm sure about us, about our future together. If this is what it takes to secure that future, then yes, I'm certain. He drew her into his arms, holding her close as if to memorize the feel of her against him. I love you, Lillian Sinclair. When this is over, I promise you a life without shadows. I'll hold you to that, she whispered, tilting her face up to his. The kiss they shared was both a promise and a seal. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The next phase of their plan required careful timing. Isaac sent trusted men to Jefferson with letters, one to Sheriff Taylor explaining their intentions, one to Mr. Collins requesting his assistance, and one to the editor of the Jefferson Gazette. Meanwhile, Lillian wrote to several of her father's former business associates in nearby towns, men who had their own reasons to dislike Vernon Blackwell. A week later, on a Saturday when the town would be at its busiest, they put their plan into motion. Isaac, Lillian, and 4 of his most trusted hands rode into Jefferson shortly before noon. They headed directly to the bank, where Isaac had arranged a meeting with its president, Harold Winters. Winters, a cautious man who had long walked a careful line between the town's various factions, seemed nervous as they entered his office. Mr. Adler, Miss Sinclair, he greeted them, adjusting his spectacles. I've reviewed the proposal in your letter. It's unusual. But legal, Isaac pointed out, and potentially very profitable for your bank. Winters nodded reluctantly. If it works as you suggest, yes, but Blackwell has significant deposits with us to openly challenge him. Is a business decision, Lillian finished for him. One based on facts, not fear. The banker studied her with new respect. You sound like your mother, Miss Sinclair. She always did have a head for business, he sighed. Very well, I'll do as you ask, but I hope you know what you're doing. From the bank, they proceeded to the Gazette office where the editor, James Wilson, awaited them with undisguised curiosity. This is quite the story you're offering me, he said after they'd explained their purpose. Blackwell won't take kindly to it. Truth is its own defense, Isaac replied. All we're asking is that you print the facts. Wilson's eyes gleamed with the journalist's hunger for a significant story. The edition goes out this afternoon. It'll be all over town by evening. Their final stop was the sheriff's office. Taylor listened to their updated plan with a frown of concentration. It's bold, he admitted. Might even work, but if Blackwell feels cornered, he could lash out violently. That's why we need you, Isaac explained. Not to take sides, but to ensure the law is upheld, equally for everyone. Taylor considered this, then nodded slowly. "I'll have my deputies ready, but you're playing a dangerous game, Adler." "Sometimes the only way to end a threat is to meet it head-on," Isaac replied. By mid-afternoon, the special edition of the Gazette was circulating through Jefferson. Its headline was stark: "Local businessmen accused of fraud, intimidation." The article detailed Blackwell's business practices, including allegations from several sources about his use of threats and violence to acquire property and influence. Most damning was the account of the poker game where he had attempted to purchase Lillian, with sworn statements from witnesses who had previously been too frightened to speak out. Accompanying the article was a notice from Isaac Adler, announcing the formation of a new cattlemen's association open to ranchers of all sizes, with fair rates for use of shipping facilities previously controlled by Blackwell. The Bank of Jefferson, the notice stated, had agreed to back the venture with loans at reasonable interest. The town buzzed with the news. People gathered in groups on street corners, discussing the revelations in hushed but excited tones. For many, it was the first time anyone had openly challenged Blackwell's power. Isaac, Lillian, and their companions took rooms at the hotel, waiting for the inevitable response. It came just before sundown when one of Blackwell's men delivered a message. Blackwell would meet with Adler alone at the Rattlesnake Saloon at 8 o'clock to discuss recent misunderstandings. "It's a trap," Lillian said immediately. "You can't go alone." "I don't intend to," Isaac assured her. "But this meeting needs to happen. It's the next step." Sheriff Taylor, when consulted, agreed to position deputies near the saloon, ready to intervene if necessary. Several of the local ranchers who had signed on to Isaac's new association also volunteered their presence, seeing an opportunity to finally stand against Blackwell's dominance. At the appointed hour, Isaac entered the Rattlesnake Saloon. The usual crowd of drinkers and card players had thinned considerably, with only Blackwell's men and a few curious onlookers remaining. Blackwell himself sat at a corner table, seemingly relaxed but with Jensen and another armed man standing behind him. "Adler," he acknowledged coldly. "I see your time playing rancher has given you delusions of grandeur." Isaac took the chair opposite him, careful to keep his hands visible on the table. "No delusions, Blackwell, just a different vision for the future of this county." Blackwell's smile was thin. "A future where you replace me as the man of influence, ambitious. A future where no man has the kind of unchecked power you've wielded," Isaac corrected. "Where business is conducted fairly and people aren't afraid to speak the truth." "Noble sentiments," Blackwell sneered. "But we both know this is about the Sinclair woman. You could have had any female in the county, but you had to take what I considered mine." "Lillian never was and never will be yours," Isaac replied, his voice hardening. "She's not property to be wagered or won." "So you say," Blackwell leaned forward. "Here's my counter-offer. Retract your accusations, dissolve your little association, and leave Jefferson County permanently. In return, I'll allow you to keep your worthless ranch and your woman." Isaac met his gaze steadily. "That's not going to happen." "Then perhaps this will change your mind." Blackwell gestured, and one of his men brought forward a familiar figure, Frank Sinclair, his face bruised and his hands bound. Isaac's expression didn't change, though inwardly he cursed. They hadn't anticipated Blackwell would use Frank as leverage. "Miss Sinclair's father has been my guest since his release from jail," Blackwell explained with false pleasantness. "He's been most cooperative in helping me understand his daughter's value. If you've harmed him, oh, nothing permanent yet." Blackwell's smile vanished. "But that could change quickly if you persist in this foolishness." Before Isaac could respond, the saloon doors opened and Lillian entered, followed by Sheriff Taylor. She had changed from her traveling clothes into a simple but elegant blue dress, her hair arranged neatly beneath a small hat. She looked every inch the respectable businesswoman as she approached the table. "Miss Sinclair," Blackwell said, surprise briefly crossing his features. "I don't recall inviting you to this discussion." I invited myself, she replied calmly, though her eyes widened at the sight of her father. Since it appears I'm the subject of negotiation yet again. Frank Sinclair looked up, shame written across his battered face. Lillian, I'm sorry, he said he'd kill me if I didn't help him. Of course he did, father, she said softly. Mr. Blackwell only knows how to get his way through threats and violence. Blackwell's face darkened with anger. Careful, Miss Sinclair. Your future depends on the outcome of this meeting. No, Mr. Blackwell, she corrected him. Your future does. She nodded to Sheriff Taylor, who stepped forward. Vernon Blackwell, the sheriff announced formally. I have warrants for your arrest on charges of kidnapping, assault, and conspiracy to commit murder, based on sworn testimony from multiple witnesses, including Frank Sinclair here. Blackwell laughed derisively. You won't serve those warrants, Taylor. We both know who really runs this county. Not anymore, came a voice from the doorway. Harold Winters, the bank president, entered with several other business owners Lillian had contacted. The bank is calling in all loans made to your enterprises, Mr. Blackwell, effective immediately. An audit of your accounts has revealed several irregularities that require investigation. Blackwell's composure slipped for the first time. You can't do that. I don't half this town. Actually, Winters continued, adjusting his spectacles, our records indicate that much of what you claim to own is leveraged against loans that are now in default. Isaac watched the realization dawn on Blackwell's face. His empire of fear was crumbling before his eyes. The man's hand moved toward his jacket, but Sheriff Taylor was quicker, his pistol already drawn. Don't, Taylor warned. Your men are outnumbered, and unlike you, I don't bluff. It was true. Through the windows, Blackwell could see that the street had filled with townspeople and ranchers, many armed, all watching to see if he would finally face justice. This isn't over, Blackwell hissed, though his confidence was clearly shaken. Yes, it is, Isaac replied. Your choice now is simple surrender peacefully and face trial, or resist and face the consequences. For a moment, it seemed Blackwell might choose violence. Then, calculating as always, he raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. Take him, Taylor instructed his deputies. And his men, too. As Blackwell was led away, his final glare promised vengeance, but the threat held less power now that his web of influence had been exposed and broken. Frank Sinclair, freed from his bonds by one of the deputies, approached Lillian hesitantly. I never meant for any of this to happen, daughter. She studied him, seeing not the strong father of her childhood but a broken man consumed by his weaknesses. I know, father, but meaning and doing are different things. Can you ever forgive me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lillian glanced at Isaac, drawing strength from his steady presence. Forgiveness may take time, she said finally, but I won't let bitterness poison my future. We'll talk when you're ready to truly change. It wasn't the reconciliation Frank had hoped for, but it was more than he deserved. He nodded, accepting the partial olive branch for what it was. As the crowd dispersed and the excitement of the confrontation faded, Isaac took Lillian's hand. You were magnificent, he told her, braver than anyone had a right to expect. I had good reason to be brave, she replied, squeezing his fingers. Some things are worth fighting for. The next few weeks saw significant changes in Jefferson. Blackwell was held for trial, his fortune diminished by the revelation of his financial misdeeds and the dissolution of his business interests. Many who had suffered under his influence came forward with their stories, ensuring he would face justice for years of intimidation and corruption. Isaac's Cattlemen's Association flourished, providing a more equitable system for local ranchers and farmers. The Bank of Jefferson, under Winters' more progressive leadership, began offering loans to smaller operators who had previously been excluded from economic opportunity. As for Frank Sinclair, he accepted his daughter's conditions that he seek help for his gambling addiction and make honest amends to those he had wronged. It was a long road ahead, but the first steps had been taken. 1 month after Blackwell's arrest on a perfect autumn day, Isaac and Lillian were married in a simple ceremony on the porch of Adler Ranch. Martha, tearful with joy, stood as Lillian's witness. Caleb served as best man, and Sarah had prepared a feast that would be remembered in the county for years to come. As they spoke their vows, surrounded by friends and the beauty of the land Isaac had made his own, Lillian felt the final pieces of her life falling into perfect alignment. From the ashes of her father's terrible mistake had risen something precious and enduring, a love founded on respect, courage, and unwavering commitment. "I promise to cherish you all the days of my life," Isaac said, his voice steady as he placed the simple gold band on her finger to join her engagement ring. "To build our future together, side by side, as equals in all things." "And I promise to stand with you through whatever comes," Lillian responded, sliding the matching ring onto his finger. "To make our home wherever we are together." The celebration lasted well into the evening, the ranch house filled with music and laughter. As twilight descended, Isaac led his bride away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I knew was possible," she answered truthfully. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new horizons to explore together. But for now, this moment of perfect peace was enough. "It's strange to think," Lillian mused, "that all of this began with a card game and a desperate gamble." Isaac pressed a kiss to her temple. "Some gambles are worth taking." As they returned to their celebration, hand in hand, Lillian reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from a night of fear and betrayal to this day of joy and promise. Her father's terrible decision had led, through an unexpected path, to the greatest blessing of her life. In Isaac, she had found not a savior but a partner, not an owner but an equal. The debt that had nearly cost her freedom had been torn apart that night in the saloon, but the bond that had formed in its place would last a lifetime. Years passed, and Adler Ranch prospered under Isaac and Lillian's joint stewardship. Their partnership proved as effective in business as in life, with Lillian's head for figures complementing Isaac's practical knowledge of ranching. They expanded thoughtfully, adding orchards and cropland to the cattle operation, creating a diverse enterprise that weathered the inevitable ups and downs of Texas agriculture. Their first child, a son they named James after Isaac's father, was born in the spring of 1877, followed by a daughter, Catherine, 2 years later. The children grew up strong and free on the ranch, learning to ride almost as soon as they could walk, absorbing their parents' values of hard work, honesty, and respect for the land. Frank Sinclair, true to his word, fought his demons and eventually earned a place in his grandchildren's lives, though the relationship with Lillian remained tinged with the memory of his betrayal. He never fully regained the man he had once been, but he found a measure of redemption in his later years, working with other gambling addicts and cautioning young men about the perils of easy vice. As for Vernon Blackwell, justice eventually claimed him. Convicted of multiple crimes, he spent years in prison before being released, a broken man with neither fortune nor influence. He left Texas, never to return, his name becoming little more than a cautionary tale in Jefferson County. The Cattlemen's Association that Isaac had founded became a model for similar organizations across Texas, promoting fair practices and providing smaller ranchers with the collective strength to negotiate with railroads and buyers. Lillian's careful management of its accounts ensured its stability through economic fluctuations that bankrupted less well-run ventures. Martha Green remained a beloved figure in their lives, splitting her time between her boarding house in Jefferson and the ranch, where she was Auntie Martha to the children and a trusted confidante to Lillian. Her wisdom and practical advice guided the family through challenges both large and small. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac surprised Lillian with a trip to San Francisco, her first venture beyond Texas, since coming west as a child. They spent 2 glorious weeks exploring the vibrant city, attending the theater, and walking along the spectacular coastline. It was a reminder that while the ranch was their foundation, the world beyond remained open to them when they chose to explore it. Returning home, they found the ranch functioning smoothly under Caleb's temporary management, testament to the strong community they had built around them. Their children, cared for by Sarah and Martha during their absence, greeted them with excited stories of ranch adventures and newly acquired skills. That night, as they settled back into their bedroom, Lillian found a small package on her pillow. Inside was a delicate silver locket containing miniature portraits of James and Catherine. "To remind you of why we work so hard," Isaac explained, fastening it around her neck, "and why it's all worthwhile." She touched the locket gently, then turned to embrace her husband. "I need no reminder." "But it's beautiful, thank you." As they stood by the window, looking out over the ranch that had become the center of their shared life, Lillian reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. Her father's desperate gamble meant to enslave her had instead set her free to find love, purpose, and a future brighter than she could have imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked, his arms around her waist. "About cards and chances," she replied. "About how sometimes losing everything is the only way to win what truly matters." He smiled, understanding as he always did. "The best hand I ever played," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. Outside their window, the Texas night spread vast and glittering with stars, promising tomorrow and all the days after days they would face together, not by chance or fate but by choice, the most powerful bond of all.